£50,000 a year. That's roughly what a recruitment agency extracts from a single contractor placement. Your skills, your delivery, your reputation, their margin. And the thing is, you already know this. You've known it for a while. So let me show you exactly what I'll do if I was sitting where you are sitting right now. I'm Javid Khan, founder of InovaOS, and I've spent over 25 years inside the exact world I'm talking about here. I've been the contractor watching someone else take margin from my work. I've been the Big Four director seeing how talent gets packaged, priced, and sold. I've been the founder building service businesses from the ground up. And I've been the acquirer looking at what makes a business valuable enough to buy. I built and exited a cloud service business to a private equity-backed group for an 8-figure valuation. I helped build a 9-figure AWS business for a global enterprise in 18 months, partly through acquiring 2 consultancies on the buy side. Today, I'm the co-founder and CTO of CloudGuard AI, a venture-backed cybersecurity company on track for a 9-figure exit. And I was named one of Time's top 50 most ambitious business leaders in 2025. So when I talk about agency margin, independence, and moving out of the time for money trap, I'm not looking at it from one angle. I've seen the whole system. I've been sold through it, I've built beyond it, and I've sat on the other side of the table assessing what creates real value. That's why this matters, because the issue isn't just the agencies take a margin. The issue is that most brilliant technical people never build the structure that allows them to keep the value they create. And I've spent years helping contractors, consultants, and senior technology professionals change that, moving from borrowed pipelines, rented relationships, and someone else's client access into something they actually own. The pattern of what works is remarkably consistent, and I call it the independence architecture. And I'm going to walk you through each one in the exact order I'd execute them if I was starting this from zero today. So let's start with the phase most people skip entirely. Phase 1. I call this the dependency audit. And the reason why I start here is because you cannot fix a problem you haven't measured, right? That's basic engineering. You don't optimize a system you haven't profiled. So the very first thing I do is sit down and map exactly where my income comes from and who actually controls it. Most contractors think they already know this. They'll say something like, well, I've got 2 agencies I work with regularly. But when you actually draw it out, the picture is almost always worse than you think. So here's what I do. I'd open up a blank document and answer 3 questions. How many clients have I worked with in the last 3 years? Of those, how many did I find myself versus how many came through a recruiter? And of my total income of those 3 years, what percentage was controlled by someone else's phone call? And when I say controlled by someone else's phone call, I mean this: if your recruiter decided tomorrow to send a different contractor to that client, what would happen to your income? That's the real test. Not do I have a good relationship with my recruiter. The test is, could they replace me in the transaction without my permission? And if the answer is yes, then you don't control that revenue. They do. I worked with this infrastructure consultant about a year ago, something like 16 years in the industry. And when we ran this exercise, the number was 94%. He had 0 direct client relationships, not one. And he referred to one of those recruiters as a mate. That mate was taking roughly £400 a day from his placement every single day, but making the initial introduction once. And look, I'm not saying recruiters are evil, they serve a function. I've got very good friends in this industry. The problem is the ratio. When 80 to 90, sometimes 100% of your income runs through someone else's database, you don't have a business, you have a dependency. In other words, you've built your entire livelihood on infrastructure you don't own, which basically means someone else has root access to your career. Think of it like running your entire production environment on a single vendor's platform with no migration path, no redundancy, no failover, one API change, one pricing update, one decision made in a room you're not invited to, and your entire system goes down. No architect will sign off that design for a client's infrastructure, but that's exactly the design most contractors are running for their own income. So that's what the audit does. It gives you the actual number. And once you see it written down, you can't unsee it. That discomfort is the point. That's phase 1. So now I know my number. The next question is, why? Why am I going through agencies in the first place? And the answer comes down to the structural problem. Phase 2, and I call this the positioning shift. Here's what happens with most contractors. You start out, you're good at your job, agencies love you because you're easy to place, you bill a decent rate, the client's happy, the agency's happy, everyone's happy. And that cycle just repeats year after year after year, right? But here's the problem. When a recruiter describes you to a client, what do they actually say? Something like, I've got a senior cloud architect, 12 years experience, AWS certified, available from March. That's your entire value proposition filtered through someone else's 2-sentence summary. You're a line item on a shortlist next to 3 other contractors who look roughly the same on paper. So what I do is completely reframe from how I would describe what I do. Not for the recruiter, for the end client. Instead of I'm a senior cloud architect with 12 years experience, I'd position myself as I help mid-market financial service companies migrate legacy infrastructure to cloud in under 6 months without disrupting any live trading systems. You see the difference? The first one describes what I am. The second one describes what I solve. And clients don't buy what you are. They buy what you solve. In other words, you're moving from a commodity that gets compared on a day rate to a specialist that gets compared on outcomes. One is a procurement exercise. The other is a strategic decision. Make sense? Now, what I would not do is try to be everything to everyone. I help organizations with digital transformations, cloud migrations, security, DevOps, and data strategy. That's not positioning. That's a brochure. And it makes you invisible because you sound identical to everyone else. It's the difference between a general practitioner and a cardiac surgeon. Both are doctors. One gets paid 5 times more, not because they know more medicine overall, because they solve one thing at a level nobody else can match. So I'd pick one industry, one problem, one measurable outcome, not forever, just as a starting architecture. You can expand later, but the entry point has to be narrow enough that when the right person hears it, they think that's exactly what we need, rather than they sound like every other contractor. And honestly, this is where most people stall, because narrowing feels like losing opportunities, but it's actually the opposite. Now you're findable for a specific problem rather than invisible in a sea of generalists. That's phase 2. So now I've got my positioning, I know who I help, what I solve, and the outcome I deliver. The question becomes, how do people find out about me without a recruiter making the introduction? That's phase 3, the direct channel. Let me start with what I would not do. I would not build a website. I would not spend 3 weeks chasing brand colors. None of that matters at this stage. That's procrastination disguised as progress. What I would do is one thing: start publishing on LinkedIn. One platform, one channel, consistent. Now, I know what you might be thinking. LinkedIn is full of rubbish. And you are right, most of it is noise. But here's why that's good news. The bar is astonishingly low. If you're a senior tech professional who can write clearly about real problems in your domain, you're immediately in the top 5%. You don't need to go viral. You just need to share what you actually know. So here's what I'd post. Not, I migrated a client to AWS last month. That's a diary entry. Instead, 3 things most mid-market firms get wrong about cloud migration timelines, or the compliance blind spot I see in every financial services cloud project. Each post demonstrates expertise without asking for anything. And critically, it reaches the people who actually have these problems, not the recruiters, decision makers, the CTOs, the IT directors who are dealing with exactly these challenges. Think of it like building your own signal tower. Right now, your signal goes through a relay station, which is a recruiter. They control the frequency, the message, the audience. What you're building is your own broadcast capability. Same expertise, no relay station required. And I'd aim for about 3 to 4 posts per week. Short posts, 150 to 300 words each, consistently for a minimum of 90 days before expecting meaningful traction. I was working with this DevSecOps consultant, contracting through agency for about 8 years, billing around £850 a day, but completely invisible to the market outside of her recruiter's contacts. So we got her posted on LinkedIn twice a week initially, just sharing observations from her actual work on security automation in regulated environments. After about 10 weeks, a compliance director at a financial services firm reached out directly. He'd been reading her post for about a month. That single conversation turned into a £45,000 engagement across 3 months. No recruiter involved, no margin extracted. And if that same engagement had gone through an agency, she'd have lost something like £15,000 to £18,000. Gone for a problem someone else didn't solve. The direct channel didn't give her a client, it gave her back the margin she'd been giving away for 8 years. That's phase 3. So now I'm visible, people are starting to see my name. The question is, how do I turn visibility into actual revenue? Because visibility without conversion is just an audience. Phase 4. The relationship conversion. This is where the money actually shifts. Most people get this wrong. They wait. They think eventually someone will message and say, I'd like to hire you. And occasionally it does happen, but relying on this is passive. That's like deploying a monitoring system and never checking the dashboard. What I do instead is actively run discovery conversations. And these are fundamentally different from sales calls. A discovery conversation is a 30-minute call where the entire purpose is to understand someone's situation. It's not a pitch. You're asking, what's your biggest challenge with problem right now? What have you tried? What does success look like in the next 12 months? And here's why this works for technical professionals specifically. You're already excellent at diagnosing problems. That's literally your job. A discovery conversation is the exact same process applied to a business problem. Same diagnostic muscle, different domain. Make sense? Now, how would I get these conversations? 3 ways. First, respond to anyone who engages meaningfully with my content. Not a generic thanks for connecting, something like, Hey, notice you commented on the post about migration timelines. Is that something your team is dealing with? Second, pay attention to who's viewing my profile. LinkedIn shows you this. If a head of infrastructure views your profile after you posted about infrastructure challenges, that's intent data. Reach out. Third, proactively message 5 to 10 people per week who fit my ideal client profile. Not a pitch, a question. Curious whether a specific challenge is something your team is navigating right now. You're not asking for work. You're starting conversations about problems you actually solve. And some percentage, maybe 1 in 5, will naturally lead to, actually, we could use help with that. In other words, you're building a distributed pipeline of relationships. Multiple nodes, multiple paths to revenue, so if one goes quiet, the system stays up. You see the structural difference? This phase requires you to get comfortable with conversations that don't immediately produce revenue. Some calls go nowhere. Some lead to an engagement 6 months later. Some lead to unexpected referrals. The point is that you have enough running at any given time that your pipeline isn't dependent on a single source. That's phase 4. And so that brings me to the last phase. This is where people make the biggest mistake. They get one direct client and they think the game is over. Or worse, they immediately burn every agency relationship. Phase 5, the gradual migration. And that word gradual is doing all the heavy lifting here. What I would not do is flip from 100% agency to 0% overnight. That's not courageous, that's reckless. What I do is think about this as a ratio shift over 12 to 18 months. Right now your ratio is what, 90-10, 100-0. The goal is to move it gradually. First direct client, maybe 70-30, then 60-40. Then over a year you're sitting at 30% agency, 70% direct. The gradual approach isn't just safer, it's structurally smarter. Your agency contracts fund the transition. You're still billing £800 a day through your current placement. That income covers your mortgage, your life. What you're building in phases 2 through to 4 is the alternative that eventually replaces the agency income. But you don't need to bet your livelihood on it working immediately. Do you follow? It's like migrating a production system. You don't just switch off the legacy platform and hope the new one works. You run them in parallel. You route traffic gradually, you monitor it. And only once the new system is proven do you decommission the old one. Same principle. There was a security architect I once worked with, let's call him Dan. About 14 years contracting through agencies, billing something like £900 a day. When we ran the audit, his number was effectively 100%. We worked through this exact sequence, narrowed his positioning to help financial services firms prepare for regulatory audits around cloud infrastructure. He started posting on LinkedIn 3 times a week. After about 4 months, his first direct inquiry came. A mid-market bank, roughly £40,000 across 2 months. But he didn't quit his agency contract. He ran both in parallel. Then a referral came from the first client. Then a third engagement came through LinkedIn. By month 10, his ratio had shifted to roughly 40-60, and his total annual income was actually higher. Not because he was working more hours, because he wasn't losing £400 a day to agency margins on direct work. Same expertise, same hours, more money. Different delivery architecture. And the end state isn't zero agency involvement. Dan didn't stop using agencies entirely. Agencies are a tool. The problem was never that they exist. The problem was dependency. The end state is choice. You use an agency when it serves you. You work directly when it serves you. None of them individually controls your income. That's what independence actually looks like. Not ideology, engineering. And honestly, this is the part that changes everything. Not just the money, the feeling. The moment you realize that if one client ends or one agency changes their terms, your income doesn't collapse. Security from a system you designed and built yourself. Once you have that, you never want to go back. So let me pull the whole thing together. The independence architecture. Phase 1, the dependency audit. Know your actual number. Write it down. Let it bother you. Phase 2, the positioning shift. Move from describing what you are to describing what you solve. One industry, one problem, one measurable outcome. Phase 3, the direct channel. LinkedIn, consistent, 3 to 4 posts a week. Demonstrate expertise to decision makers, not recruiters. Phase 4, relationship conversion. Discovery conversations. Build a distributed pipeline, 5 to 10 outbound messages a week. And phase 5, the gradual migration. Shift the ratio over 12 to 18 months. Fund the transition with your current income. Move from dependency to choice. When you put all 5 together, you go from a single point failure to a distributed system where your income flows through multiple direct relationships that you own. Same person, same skills, completely different architecture. And a completely different life because of it. If that dependency number is sitting around 80 or 90%, do the audit this week. Open a document, answer those 3 questions, look at the number. That's step 1. And if you want help implementing this, that's what we do at InovaOS. There's a program called Launch that walks you through this entire transition. The link is in the description. But regardless, the audit is where it starts. Do that first, everything else follows. I'll see you in the next one.